Very good afternoon, everybody. We're going to talk about the mechanics of development in the conservation of cultural heritage, much like what Stefano said about the multi-stakeholders and the management of things. We're going to talk about, we've been talking about how problems have resulted in crisis in cultural heritage. I'm going to give a perspective, just a few points about how development itself has been one of the reasons which leads to a different type of crisis in cultural heritage. There's a compilation of 5 books called the Panchatantra, compiled in the 14th century. It talks about this congregation of birds. It talks about this congregation of birds from all over the world who came together from different places. And they arrived at the thought that to know oneself is hard, to know wise effort is hard, to know which is vain effort is also hard. But accurate self-critics are secure in times of strain. And we have come together from different parts of the world today to also talk about these things in this context. India is a land which is rich in culture, like many of our countries where we come from. And with every wave of development, there is also a backwash. And in the backwash are eroded a lot of our cultural values and our systems. What I'm going to talk about is if we look at the basic aspects of development, let's look at the main paradigms for development which are essential to our life and where there are competing sectors for the allocation of resources. And it is even more true in developing countries. If you look at food, if I just tell you the mechanism of how it works, suppose I take up the aspect of the milk revolution. Suppose I take the aspect of the milk revolution. And how in the mountains of India, for example, we decided to bring in heifers to replace the local cattle. We're talking about an art tradition of making sculptures for rituals using butter. This art form is called Shezokargyan. It is done in the monasteries. Now, this art is dying out because the sculptures, it is difficult to make these sculptures anymore. And if you see the network of how this goes, it is actually the animal husbandry schemes and the schemes from the department which are replacing the local cattle with the heifers. There's much more milk, which is essential for the children and for everybody. But at the same time, it interestingly is initiating this chain of events because that butter of that livestock which was indigenous is not there anymore. You cannot have butter which sustains at these temperatures here. So you're actually indirectly impacting change and precipitating that small crisis in that cultural element which is very important for them. It's important to look at the networks that development does to be able to arrive at where you have to pinpoint your intervention also. That's for food. I'll go on to water. Stepwells of India. Fantastic indigenous water conservation schemes. That's the trick. Multi-tiered water systems. With development, even with the latest development schemes which are ensuring a 24-hour water supply, which is essential. So we are saying that this development is essential. It is also necessary and essential to understand these mechanisms so that we can, because the solutions are inherent in this mechanism itself. So with all those water pipelines being laid and everything, all these indigenous systems are being ignored at not just the peril, but the actual precipitation of drought in various parts of the country. So that itself, these are also cultural elements. Our seeds, our water systems, the things which are impacting the basic tenets of food, water, shelter. Development schemes on this are essential, but it is important that we also look at this aspect of our cultural heritage and how it is being impacted, other than the precipitation of disasters, both natural and man-made. Clothing. It impacts the minds of people. The fact that people sometimes feel disempowered to use their own clothing. Families, within families also sometimes, children are pushed to wear something else because that is too local and that's too... It's something in the mind. And that all these things are pointers at the overall aspect of conservation of cultural heritage. Shelter. We can move on to education, the language of education. There has been a disassociation of the practitioners from the experts because the language has not been common. In terms of craft traditions, the big development schemes that happen by various agencies, we seem to be following the paradigm of replication of successful projects. We have seen some examples here. It is disastrous to replicate. It doesn't happen. Just called it that, an acronym, the EASY syndrome. It is, most of our development schemes are also failing because we're trying to replicate successes in cultural heritage conservation. And these are things that we need to look at. So while we welcome development, we must be conscious of the backwash and to see the networks with which cultural heritage is formed, the processes, and it holds the keys to how it can be conserved. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.